The ideas that gave birth to our nation are the ideas that our nation is resistant to right now, and we should talk about that all the time.
In a world where narratives are shaped by corporations and gatekeepers, independent voices matter more than ever. Badlands Media brings together citizen journalists, researchers, and independent thinkers.
The truth is triggering.
Question the narrative. Explore the facts.
Its authenticity, courage, resilience.
Search for the truth others won't.
It's not about being first or being right.
The information war is changing.
It's about being authentic.
Embrace the friction.
Embrace the friction.
Shut the f*** up.
Authentically antagonizing. Join the movement.
I'm going to say how I feel.
Follow Badlands Media.
This is about the future.
The Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
Everybody's panicked. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let TrumpaMania run wild, brother. Let TrumpaMania rule again. Let TrumpaMania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
Hidden away on the front lines of eastern Ukraine is a potentially deadly force. Volunteer fighters who saved the nation from invaders remain armed and dangerous, and could always turn their weapons on their own government.
То есть объясни ему, что сейчас мы герои-красавцы, а завтра мы приказом президента станем террористами.
So what would you do if the government declared you a terrorist and made you a criminal?
Ну, уже были попытки просто на самом деле там захватить нашу базу. Но у них не получилось. Ну, займем круговую оборону, а там посмотрим, насколько их хватит.
It smells a little bit like powder.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. They've been shelling this piece of road. Yeah.
The war's been dragging on here for years. Ukrainian armed forces are locked in a stalemate with Russian-backed separatists, and civilians are left to pick up the pieces. When it all started in 2014, Ukraine's military was totally unprepared. We're heading to meet the guy who back then took charge and urged anyone, regardless of their past or motive, to get to the front and fight.
Another checkpoint?
Yeah, we should stop filming somewhere here.
Camera down. I've followed the conflict in Ukraine for a while. Obviously, you're a very powerful guy. I heard you have a sniper rifle in your office.
Turchinov is a controversial guy. In 2014, he stepped in as Ukraine's acting president. At the time, anti-government protesters were in open revolt. Neighboring Russia moved in and took over Crimea, and then began arming separatists in eastern Ukraine.
До наших північних і східних кордонів російські війська. Ситуація була просто драматична.
So there's two wars and basically no army.
І тоді я змушений був звернутися до українських патріотів і попросити їх іти добровільно захищати Україну. За це вони віддавали свою кров і життя.
It's on the record that some of these guys that were fighting were criminals, neo-Nazis, fascists.
Але дехто з них дійсно показав себе з негативної сторони. Але це були одиниці.
So you don't regret that decision at all?
Коли б ситуація повторилася, я б діяв би так само. Тому що головна моя задача була захистити країну. І ми виконали це завдання.
Are they still there? Are they still actually undertaking serious operations?
Саме Збройні сили сьогодні повністю несуть відповідальність за захист України.
You're sure the volunteers, they're just doing assistance now?
Безумовно. І ще ж кажу, між Україною і Росією саме відповідають наші військові керівники.
Turchinov's sticking to the script. To secure Western military aid, Ukraine must show that proper command and control are firmly in place. As if to prove Ukraine's military might to us, they roll out the big guns.
It's just like bringing out the show horse, except it's a live tank. That was sick.
It's an impressive show, but most of these top-of-the-line tanks are for the export market, not the front lines of eastern Ukraine. It doesn't quite add up. It makes us question the party line that there aren't any rogue volunteers out there still fighting, unwilling to hand over their weapons to their own government.
We have to sneak in because the Ukrainian military that set up all these checkpoints to kind of vet who goes in and out is not really keen on us covering the battalions.
Yeah, he needs the passport.
So we're gonna follow him in?
Yeah.
Perfect. It's like an apocalyptic movie set.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, guys, here we are. Let me know what it says. The sign says we are not here.
The sign says we're not here?
We are not here.
That. Jesus. We got through a military checkpoint as volunteers helping the military. We're here kind of completely clandestinely. Yeah, I wouldn't fuck with these guys. Everyone keeps talking about snipers, so let's go hang out with snipers.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to
the Book of Trump. I am your host, the ghost of Base Patrick Henry, Gordon McCormick. This is Badlands Media, the book, chapter 50 of the Book of Trump, the war in Donbass. So we spent the last chapter that we did. We talked about the Azov Battalion. We kind of talked about the who that was involved in this conflict, and now we're going to actually walk through the events. And I thought it made sense to do it that way because the who, as you saw in that clip, is so important. That was a clip from Vice News, I believe, from circa 2016 to 2017, talking about the 2014 war in hindsight. And of course, you recognize the guy that was being interviewed. That was Alexander Turchinov, the interim president who was installed by the CIA in the wake of the Maidan coup. So before we go any further, let's get a word from our sponsors, from our friends over at Goldco. It's officially a new era for gold and silver. Gold has broken $5,000 an ounce, and silver has surged past $100. In 2025 alone, gold jumped 64%, while silver skyrocketed 150%. And with political and economic uncertainty ahead, 2026 could bring even bigger moves. After such a historic run, a pullback is normal. Metals move fast, so some consolidation is expected, but top analysts are calling for even higher prices. We've seen the first bank failure of 2026 was with regulators shutting down Metropolitan Capital Bank and Trust in Chicago. Could more follow? It's no surprise Americans are pulling money from banks and turning to the proven protection of gold and silver. Big news, Goldco is celebrating America's 250th anniversary with a limited time bonus. Get up to 10% free gold or silver plus free storage and a free home safe with qualifying cash purchase. This offer won't last, so act now. Are we seeing the early signs of another 2008 style crash? Don't wait for the next shoe to drop. Protect your wealth with precious metals because in uncertain times, gold and silver shine brightest. Visit badlandsgold.com today for your free 2026 gold and silver kit and bonus buy. That's badlandsgold.com. Yeah, so thank you to Goldco. Go check them out, badlandsgold.com. Okay, so tonight we're going to be discussing, this is obviously pre-recorded. This is just a few hours earlier than the show normally airs. But tonight we're going to be talking about the war in Donbass. So this is the actual conflict that you recall hearing about on the news in 2014. There was a lot of preamble. Remember, we did on one episode on the Maidan coup. We did an episode on the annexation of Crimea, and then an episode on the Azov Battalion specifically. But really, we talked about the broader these militias because there were many militias that were a part of all this. So now we're going to talk about the actual war that came as a result in the wake of the annexation of Crimea. Because in the annexation of following the annexation of Crimea, we then get the annexation of, let's see if I can pull up on my screen. We then get the annexation of Donetsk and Luhansk, or I guess annexation may not be the right word, but they, they were separatists trying to break away from Ukraine, following the footsteps of Crimea. You heard in that clip, again, it's Vice News. Vice News is, adjacent to the unipolar hegemony, the establishment. So they framed it as Russia coming into Crimea and taking Crimea away from Ukraine, when the reality is, as we covered on this program, the head of the parliament in Crimea, the head of their government their elected government went to Moscow and asked Putin and the Kremlin to come in and annex Crimea and make it one of these independent republics under the Russian Federation. They then came in and held a referendum in March. The referendum passed overwhelmingly, and the rest is history. So that takes us into April of 2014. And this is when Donetsk and Luhansk, together known as the Donbass region, break away from Ukraine and follow in the footsteps of Crimea. Now, Crimea was taken by Russia without a bullet being fired, right? But that was not the case with Donetsk and Luhansk. And that is in large part to the efforts of guys like Igor Kolomoisky, who we talked about last week, and the Azov Battalion and the Donbass Battalion, and all these other militias that he funded. So looking at the timeline, we get to April 6th, 2014. The government buildings are seized in Donetsk, Luhansk, and other cities. Armed militants capture Slavyansk. Separatists proclaim the Donetsk People's Republic, the DPR. 20 days later, April 27th, other separatists proclaim the Luhansk People's Republic, the LPR. And so the two, there are a lot of different leaders in both of these regions, but the two, the main characters that emerge later as the head of the state in 2017, 2018 would be Denis Pushilin. I think I'm saying his name right. That is, he was the leader of the Donetsk People's Republic, the DPR, and then Leonid Pezeshnik. I think I'm saying his name right as well. That he's the leader of the LPR, the Luhansk People's Republic. So before we go any further, I have another clip to play that kind of provides a little bit of it just provides a little bit of coloring, provide some clips. I think the visuals I think help as opposed to just listening to me talk about it. So let's pull that up. And so, of course, Vice News, they are, which I don't even think they're even operating anymore. But they, of course, frame this as an invasion, like Russia is invading Ukraine and stealing their land, when the reality is that the local governments of these regions who view themselves as Russian, ethnically Russian, they speak Russian, and they do not, they saw the Maidan coup happen and they reject it. And they say, this is not our government. This is obviously a coup. This is a foreign insurgency into Ukraine. And so we don't want to be a part of it anymore. This is April 7th, 2014 in Donetsk.
We're in Donetsk. It's the biggest of the cities in eastern Ukraine, which is pretty pro-Russian. And what's happened yesterday is that 3 regional administrations in 3 of the biggest cities in the Donetsk region have been taken over by supporters of Russia.
Создание суверенного государства Донецкая Народная Республика.
They've declared this to be the People's Republic of Donetsk. So the people here consider this to now be an independent country.
Я хочу вам сказать, что здесь, вы видите, сколько здесь народа. Пришли уже все, потому что терпением пришел конец.
And that's actually a mischaracterization, that they don't consider it to be an independent country. They consider it to be an independent republic under the Russian Federation. So it's important that distinction is important. They have their own flag. They have their own, name, the DPR and the LPR, the Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. But remember, the Russian Federation is made up of, 20 some different independent republics that all fall under the Federation of Moscow, under the Russian Federation.
Украинцы, я украинка. Вот Лиля тоже украинка. Но я хочу быть в России. Я хочу, чтобы мои дети, мои внуки жили в России. Мы натерпелись здесь.
А как вы думаете, будут украинские власти пытаться вас отсюда выгнать?
So see, this woman is saying, we want to live in Russia. I want my children and grandchildren to live in Russia. So she's not saying we want to live in our own country, like an independent country. They're saying we want to live in Russia, as opposed to Ukraine. So that just contradicts what that guy just said.
Конечно. Я надеюсь, что мы все-таки, и Владимир Владимирович, и Янукович наш, что они все-таки вернутся к нам, заберут нас. И мы будем видеть.
Это еда, это люди свозят со всего города. Приезжают семьи с детьми, которые не могут здесь остаться, но они привозят то, что может. Видели, там коробка с деньгами, кто-то деньги ложит, кто-то привозит кусок сала, колбасу. Ну, все, что у кого есть. На что люди богаты, то и привозят. Пойдемте посмотрим. Давайте. Ребята, это White News. Правдивая интерес. Пошли. Давай. Куда с камерой? Ребята, это White News.
Седьмой, восьмой, девятый, десятый, 11.
Так что ты не уйди, блин.
30 человек.
Здесь происходит то, что люди просто собрались для того, чтобы отстоять свои права, отстоять свои позиции, отстоять для того, чтобы не гибли шахты, не гибли Донбасс. Это всегда был промышленный, в первую очередь, район. Вот. Я работаю на заводе, людей отправляют бесплатные, людям не платят зарплаты, не платят премии. Вот. Зарплаты там лишили премии, объяснили это тем, что это сделано потому, что у нас нет продукта. На самом деле эти деньги отправили в украинскую армию.
А народ хочет в Россию?
А вы не видели?
А вы сами не замечаете эти флаги, не замечаете, что вообще происходит здесь? Для чего все это вообще собралось?
Да. Вот. Ну, поменять.
Okay, so I think I was muted when I was just speaking here. Oh, I was just reading what this guy says. So what let me go back a little bit. What the guy says is he says people got together here to stand up for their rights and beliefs. So that the mines won't be shut down. Donbass has always been an industrial region. I work at a plant. People are being suspended without pay. People aren't receiving salaries or benefits. They didn't pay us salary or benefits, and they told us that it was done because we didn't produce enough goods. But really, the money was sent to the Ukrainian army. And then the interviewer asks, do people want to be part of Russia? And then the guy responds, can't you see? Can't you see these flags and what's going on here? Why we are all gathered here? Changing a country is not as easy as changing a flag. A lot of things need to be done.
Так надо с чего-то начинать.
Не страшно, что они приведут сюда армию и будут...
He asks, aren't you afraid that they will send the army here and kick you out?
Да почему? Страшно, конечно.
He says, how can we not be? Of course we are afraid.
Как можно быть не страшно? Страшно, конечно. В любом случае.
Вчера боялись, ждали. Сегодня боимся, ждем. Ну что делать?
Today we waited and are afraid. What else can we do?
Как долго будет продолжаться?
How long will the independent republic last before it joins Russia? That's what the interviewer is asking.
Зависимая республика до того, как она станет частью России.
До референдума, чтобы было мнение народа, не чье-то там, ни киевской власти, ни губернаторов, ни Донецка, ни кого-то там, а именно мнение народа.
just been inside the regional administration building. It's completely taken over. It's full of people wearing masks with sticks, bats. They're wearing protective gear that they've made themselves. They've got a whole load of Molotov cocktails, and it looks like they're preparing for the Ukrainian authorities, if they decide to come and take the building back. They want to stay in the building until a referendum on independence, and they've already said that needs to happen before May 11th, and they definitely want to be a part of Russia. No surprise there.
Okay, so I think that sets us up to get back into the storyline. Okay, so that takes us to May. Okay, so the guy mentioned May 11th. This needs to happen before May 11th, but it says on May 19th, 2014, Pushilin, I think I'm saying this guy's name right, Denis Pushilin, became the chairman of the Supreme Council of the Donetsk People's Republic, and under the draft constitution adopted on May 15th, the new republic's head of state. In June 2014, he announced that DPR businesses which engaged in tax evasion would be nationalized. Pushilin did not envision the Donetsk People's Republic becoming an independent state, but preferred to join the Russian Federation, which he saw as a potential renewed Russian empire. It goes on to say Pushilin survived 2 assassination attempts, both occurring within a week on the 7th and the 12th of June 2014. Pushilin was in Moscow on those dates, as was widely reported at the time. Pushilin resigned from his post as chairman of the Donetsk People's Republic in July 2014. From November 14th, 2014 to September 4th, 2015, he served as a vice chairman of the Donetsk People's Republic Council. Then he replaced Andrei Persian and became the chairman of the council once again. From 2014 to 2018, Pushilin officially represented the DPR at the Trilateral Contact Group and the Minsk Two agreements. The Minsk Two agreements subsequently failed, with each side accusing the other of violating the ceasefire terms. Okay, so getting back to the timeline, we've made it through April, right? Ukraine, sometime in the middle of April, begins launching anti-terrorist operations to restore control, which is generally considered the formal start of the war. Now, as we saw in the other video, even like in 2000, I think that was 2017. Let me see if I can get an actual date on that. This was 2018. So this is May of 2018. That's the first video that we watched with the cold open. Even back then, even 4 years, this is 4 years forward from 2014. Even then, the Ukrainian army is still kind of considered a joke. In many ways, it's these militias were called the Ukrainian army because, as we learned last week, they were, by the end of 2014, they were all brought in. Most of them were brought into the at least the Azov battalion, and the really big ones were brought into the Ukrainian National Guard, and formally made incorporated into the chain of command. But that was done as the documentary explained. That was done in order to comply with regulations imposed by the West, by the United States, so that Ukraine could receive military aid, military funding, etc. So they basically haphazardly just took these militias that were, many of them were radicalized, neo-Nazi groups, etc., and they just made them part of the Ukraine military. The Ukraine military, of course, was weak, ineffective, and not at all capable of fighting the Russian military on its own, which is why these private militias that were funded by billionaires like Igor Kolomoisky became the fighting force in Ukraine and remained the fighting force in Ukraine, even operating under the formal Ukrainian military flag. Okay, so May of 2014, May 11th, DPR and LPR hold internationally unrecognized independence referendums. May 25th, and those pass. May 25th, Petro Poroshenko is elected president of Ukraine. He's thus then replacing. I think he takes office officially in June, if I'm not mistaken. But he takes over from Oleksandr Turchinov, who remains, a key figure, as we saw him being interviewed in 2018. He's just no longer the interim president. And then May 26th, the first battle of the Donetsk airport, where Ukrainian forces repel separatists at the Donetsk International Airport. The airport becomes one of the war's longest symbolic battles. So then that takes us to June 2014 with the Ukraine counteroffensive. Ukrainian forces regain several towns, heavy fighting around Mariupol, Kramatorsk, and Slaviansk, with Russia accused of sending fighters and weapons across the border. So if we come up here, we have a little map that gives you a sense of what we're looking at. I've kind of provided some various maps that that provide context for what we're looking at. So here is the overall map of Ukraine. You can see right here outlined in purple is Crimea. That was annexed without a bullet being fired by Russia. Of course, they were punished later by the Ukrainian government and by the Azov Battalion. So now we are northeast of Crimea, in the most eastern part of Ukraine, the Luhansk and Donetsk region. And so you can see the peach, kind of like orangish region. That's the area where the Russian-backed separatists firmly held those positions. And then the rest of it is mostly, while it's technically under the control of the DPR and LPR, these are the separatist governments. There are small areas, specifically in Donetsk, that are held by, that are not controlled by them, but claimed by them. So here are the breakouts. You can see these larger maps. This one with the yellow and blue on it being Donetsk, the other one being Luhansk. So Luhansk is pretty much completely controlled by the separatists, the dark pink denoting the areas that are firmly in their control, with the pink areas being, territory that was contested. Same with Donetsk, but the yellow and the blue are areas that are controlled by the Ukrainian military and their proxies. They're the militias, the Azov Battalion, the Donbass Battalion, etc. And so here's a map that kind of gives you the timeline for July, because we're about to get into July here in the timeline. So you can see Luhansk is up here on the right. Donetsk is down here on the left. The border is this dotted gray line in the background. So the purple area is the DPR LPR territory, held before July 1st, 2014. This is the area that is so they capture everything. These are the separatists, capture everything up to Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, I think I'm saying that right, and a few of these other cities. And then, of course, those areas are captured by the Ukrainian forces on July 5th. And this is where the airport is, the airport battle. You get a better representation of that here. The yellow and blue regions are the areas that are being highlighted in the purple in this map. So that should provide a little bit of context. The red, I believe those are population centers. Let me just check my legend that I have. Yeah, I think those are population centers. The red dots, like the larger the dot, the larger the population center, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So we then have this map, We'll pull this map up here in a little bit when we talk about the Minsk agreement. Okay, so let's go back to the timeline because now we're talking about July. So July 2014, June 2014 is when the Ukraine counteroffensive begins. They start retaking several towns. They take that area that I was mentioning up here, the yellow and blue region right here. That whole fight begins in June, and then by July 5th, they have the separatists abandon those cities and pull back. And this area that is purple in this map, but yellow and blue in this map, falls under Ukrainian control. Let's see. The separatists, then they're jump forward to July 17th. You get MH17. This is the Malaysia airline flight 17 that's shot down over separatist held territory. 298 people are killed. There's an international investigation that later concludes the missile system came from Russia, and the event transformed global perceptions of the war. Although I think my understanding is I don't think that actually, I don't think that story was told in its entirety. I think that was actually very much a psi act, because I believe years later that Russia was okay. So yeah, the information that comes out to the public regarding this situation comes from a bunch of sources that like this outlet Bellingcat, which I think has been proven in later years to have ties to the CIA and maybe MI6 and just other Western intelligence, Five Eyes spook kind of stuff. They're one of the outlets that are laundering a lot of this information about this crash, this shoot down. There's a video actually we can watch, that animation that was created that kind of explains what happened. So let's watch that first. This is like the official narrative, and then we'll take a look at it. And remember, this is Malaysia, like MH17. This is 3 months after that other really famous one that goes down over the ocean and just totally vanishes, right? And now we have, like the spinning orbs and all that. This is a different flight, but of course the same airline, just 3 months after the other one disappeared.
In the early afternoon of July the 17th, 2014, a Boeing 777-200 of Malaysia Airlines departs Amsterdam Airport Schiphol for Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Flight MH17 enters Ukrainian airspace at an altitude of 33,000 feet, following airway Lima 980. The crew diverts a short distance to the north to avoid some thunderstorms when returning to the airway in the eastern part of Ukrainian airspace. In this region, an armed conflict between the Ukrainian government and armed groups is in progress. Therefore, lower levels of the airspace are restricted for civil air traffic. Flight MH17 is routed above this restricted airspace to waypoint Romeo November Delta in the Russian Federation. Until that moment, the flight proceeds normally. When flight MH17 is above the eastern part of Ukraine, a Buk surface-to-air missile system fires a missile. It travels almost at 3 times the speed of sound and carries a 9N314M model warhead. Inside it is an explosive core surrounded by 2 mantles containing preformed iron fragments. Radar guides it to its target, where it is detonated by means of a proximity fuse. A Buk surface-to-air missile can reach an altitude of 80,000 feet, exceeding the flight altitude of flight MH17 by far. At 20 minutes and 3 seconds past 1, this warhead explodes to the left and above the cockpit of MH17. About 800 preformed fragments perforate the aeroplane. This impact, combined with the blast of the explosion, causes the cockpit and the business class section to separate. As it descends, the aeroplane disintegrates. None of the 298 occupants survived the crash. The investigation demonstrated that the aeroplane flew at an altitude of 33,000 feet which is to say 10.1 kilometers. No abnormalities regarding the aeroplane or crew were found. The flight proceeded normally, and no malfunctions of any system or oral warnings were recorded. Also, no distress messages were received by air traffic control. Both flight recorders stopped abruptly at 13:20:03, and from that time, the flight crew of MH17 did not respond to air traffic control messages. Flight MH17 disappeared from the radar. The aeroplane was perforated by hundreds of high-energy objects shaped like cubes and bow ties. Many fragments were found in the bodies of the crew seated in the cockpit. Some of them had a bow tie or cubic shape. The left side of the cockpit area shows a characteristic damage pattern. Traces of explosives were found in the wreckage and on the missile fragments found. Paint on fragments found inside the wreckage matches paint on the recovered missile parts. The point of detonation was determined by the spray pattern on the cockpit and by simulations, and was confirmed by the recorded sound peak. The impact and blast resulted in the aeroplane's disintegration. The wreckage of the aeroplane was distributed over 6 different sites, consistent with the way the aeroplane broke up in the air. Based on these findings, the Dutch Safety Board concludes that Flight MH17 was downed by a 9N314M warhead carried on a 9M38 series missile as installed on a Buck surface-to-air missile system. Other scenarios were investigated and excluded. No other scenario can explain this combination of factors.
The findings are conclusive and support each other based on multiple sources. To that end, we have been able to draw well-supported conclusions about the flight and the causes of the crash. Calculations have demonstrated that the missile's trajectory commenced somewhere in a 320 square kilometer area in the eastern part of Ukraine. The Russian Federation concurs with the conclusion that the crash was caused by the detonation of a warhead, but has reservations regarding the missile and warhead type. However, in our judgment, the arguments in the report overwhelmingly support the conclusions as presented.
Okay, so he makes it clear that this is an independent investigation conducted by the Dutch Safety Board, the Netherlands. And interestingly enough, let's listen. Let's hear now from the Dutch Prime Minister at the time, and this will be someone who'll be familiar to y'all.
Het is nu absoluut noodzakelijk.
It is absolutely necessary and the first priority that the repatriation of the victims takes place as quickly as possible. Anyone who does not fully cooperate leaves a mark of suspicion on himself. I am shocked by the images of utterly disrespectful behavior at the crash site. Against all rules of a studious investigation, there are people who are fooling around amongst the debris with personal and recognizable items of the victims. This is utterly disgusting. I'm a little bit late for this press conference because I've just had an intense telephone conversation with the Russian president. I have told him that time is running out for him to show the world that he is serious about his offer to help. Now he has to take responsibility towards the rebels and show the Netherlands and the world that he will do what is expected of him, to use his influence.
Yeah, so of course that was Mark Rutte, right? Who is now the NATO General Secretary, the head of NATO, and back then he was the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And so now I'm pulling up Putin's remarks. All right, so here's Putin's remarks to that.
We can say with certainty that if military actions in eastern Ukraine had not resumed on June the 28th, this tragedy would certainly not have occurred. Likewise, nobody should and nobody has the right to use this tragedy for their narrow, selfish political ends. All people responsible for the situation in the region of Ukraine need to raise the level of their responsibility before their own people and the people of all the countries whose citizens were victims of this catastrophe. For its part, Russia will do everything in its power to ensure that the conflict in eastern Ukraine passes from today's military phase to a phase of peaceful negotiations exclusively through diplomatic means.
The rebels, that the investigation...
In an hour, there will be a press conference of the relevant agencies, 51 of which are already loaded in a train refrigerators. We sent 2 trains, 4 cars, of which are right now located in Torres city. These bloody guerrillas do not allow the train to leave the area. We expect that the train will leave the area as soon as possible. Ukrainian government is ready to transfer an international investigation to our Dutch friends. Dutch side could lead the process of investigation together with the entire international community and Ukrainian authorities.
Results of the conference, which is ending actually.
Okay, yeah. So that was the Ukrainian government passing the buck on to, and then of course 60 Minutes comes in. They do their own little special. We saw how they treated Trump, yesterday. And then here, of course, is Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State at this point. Because remember, she had to step down because of the whole Benghazi scandal, right? That she was Secretary of State in the first term of Obama, and then she had to step down, and John Kerry had to come in because of how bad that whole fiasco was.
The United States obviously has a great interest in helping to maintain peace and security in Europe, and we have a formal alliance, NATO, to do so. But much of what we can do and what the president is calling for requires the full participation of our European friends and allies. And I would make 3 quick points. First, I think if there were any doubt, it should be gone by now, that Vladimir Putin, certainly indirectly through his support of the insurgents in eastern Ukraine and the supply of advanced weapons, and frankly, the presence of Russian special forces and intelligence agents, bears responsibility for what happened to the shootdown of the airline. Therefore, we have to up the sanctions that are required. The United States has continued to move forward on that. Europe has been reluctant. They need to understand they must stand up to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, so very quick, despite the fact that she's no longer Secretary of State,
To the human side of this tragedy
she's still very much out there running the psyops.
The United States obviously
and
has a
then
great interest in helping to maintain peace and security in Europe, and we have a
So much of what people do is psychologically analyze Putin.
Right.
So you tell us, what is he like as a man? You've met him many times.
Well, he's very tough. He's a very arrogant person to deal with, which I think is a combination of this vision of Russia and some fundamental insecurity. Because when you are dealing with him, he often acts as though he could care less. He's not interested. Even talking with him about getting Russia into the World Trade Organization, which is something the Obama administration was determined to do, because we want to have a rules-based order insofar as possible. Proved difficult to deal with him. He acts, bored and dismissive. So he has a lot of personas that he pulls out if he wants to stare intently at you with his very, bright blue eyes because he wants something from you or he wants to convey a message to you. He can turn on the charm, but he can also be, very tough to deal with and act as though it's a burden on him to be in conversations with other world leaders. I would be delighted if the United States could have a positive relationship with Russia. And I would be thrilled if the Russian people, who are so capable, had a normal country that they could chart a different future. I think that will be next to impossible, at least for the short term with Putin.
Yeah, and so what she really means when she says that is she means that as she said right there, well, the Obama administration wanted to bring Russia into the World Trade Organization because we wanted to have this rules-based international order, meaning that Russia would become a vassal of the Western banking system. That is exactly what she was implying there, and that basically Russia would be forced to comply with every whim that the United States government wanted to impose on it. And we're now seeing the results of that. Like when you sign up and you join the rules-based international order, if you do anything that does not align with the agenda of the establishment, they will simply sanction you. They will shut down your bank accounts. They will freeze your money. And then you will be incapable of doing anything, of paying salaries, of purchasing raw materials, of servicing your debt. Anything you have to do as a country, you can't do if you are in the rules-based international order. And we've seen now in the second iteration of this war, which we will get to eventually on the show, the splintering of that, of Russia exiting the Western banking financial system. And so here is an article. This is from the president's, let's see. Right here. So this is from Russian media. This is from May 25th. May 24th, 2018. Vladimir Putin promised to study the conclusions of the investigation about the Boeing MH17 crash. Russia will study the conclusions of the international investigation into the Boeing MH17 crash in Donbass, but will be able to recognize the results only if it takes full part in the investigation. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated this at a joint press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron, which took place following negotiations between the two leaders at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. But in any case, his quote, "But in any case, we will treat this carefully with respect and analyze everything that is stated there, formulate our attitude to this matter." Mr. Macron noted that he considers the international investigation into the plane crash objective and welcomed Russia's readiness to cooperate. Quote, "I am glad that, as the president of the Russian Federation just said, he decided to cooperate with the investigation. This is an important stage. There is still a long, important job of the investigation." Now, the Russian ministry came out and says down here, today is an international commission of inquiry that the air defense system Buk, B-U-K, that's that missile that in the animation they claim it's a Russian-made missile, shot down the Malaysian MH17 aircraft in the Donbass in July 2014, arrived from a Russian military unit. It says at the Russian Foreign Ministry, they stated that the investigation ignored Russian data. In the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, they stated that not a single Russian Buk crossed the border with Ukraine. According to Russian data, the missile from the Buk complex that shot down the plane was launched not from the area of the village of Snezhnyov, controlled by the DPR supporters, but from the village of Zaroshenkoy, which was controlled at the time by the Ukrainian army. The plane crashed, killed 298 people. And so here is that statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry, where they say that while this missile was they were in agreement with the investigation that the plane was brought down by a missile, they weren't convinced that it was a Buk missile, that it was the exact missile that they claim it was. They said it might have been a different kind of missile, but they but they are firm that the missile came from an area controlled by the Ukrainian army. And as time has gone by, it actually seems more and more likely that that is what happened, that it was actually shot down by the Ukrainian military or maybe a Ukrainian militia, and then blamed on Russia. And that was pushed out by every media station, by every Western media outlet, by Hillary Clinton, by Barack Obama, by all the people, all the typical, the usual suspects. They pushed out this rhetoric that and this narrative that it was Russia that shot down the plane, even though Russia was firm that it wasn't, that the missile didn't even come from an area that was under either Russian control or Russian separatist, Ukrainian separatist control. Okay, so let's see. Now let's go back to, so this is a significant event because it shapes world opinion of Russia, and that's the whole point of the false flag, assuming it was a false flag. The point of it was to turn the world against Russia and to get the world to sympathize with the Azov battalion, with the Ukraine, with the CIA-controlled government that came out of the Maidan coup. Okay, so we can now go back to the timeline. So now we are at September 14th, and this brings us to the Minsk One ceasefire conference. Okay, so the Minsk One, because there were two of them, ceasefire. Let's see, I think I have a map here. So basically in August of 2014, there is movement with this line of the skirmish line, so to speak. And so Ukrainian forces had regained much territory earlier that summer. Then regular Russian military intervention reversed momentum. So the Russian military then comes in to back the separatists. Ukraine suffered severe losses at Ilovaisk. I know I'm not saying that right, but these words are tough. But both sides agreed they needed a pause. So it was born out of battlefield necessity for both sides. The talks involved the Trilateral Contact Group, which was Ukraine representatives, Russian representatives, and Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe mediators. Separatist leaders from the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic also signed it. And an important point is that Russia publicly claimed it was a mediator and not a combatant. It didn't claim to be an actual combatant in the conflict. And so there were 12 main points in the Minsk agreement. And we can see this map right here. The blue is the Ukrainian line of control. The red is the separatist line of control. And then the diagonal are the buffer zones that are established, with the green being the insurgent area, the insurgent control. So the areas controlled by the separatists. And so the 12 points: immediate ceasefire, stop offensive operations from both sides, OSCE monitoring, which is that group I just mentioned, which was the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, decentralization and special status. So Ukraine would pass laws giving more local self-rule to parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. There would be prisoner exchanges, border security. Ukraine would eventually regain control of its border with Russia. Withdrawal of armed groups and mercenaries. So foreign fighters were supposed to leave the conflict entirely from both sides. And primarily those foreign fighters were fighting on the Ukrainian side. What it meant politically. So let's see. For Ukraine, it stopped the military collapse because their military was a joke. This is before, remember, like the Azov battalion and the Donbass battalion and the other militias are incorporated into the Ukraine military. That happens in November, a few months later. It bought time to rebuild their army. It forces Kiev to make a lot of difficult decisions about autonomy, and that causes some infighting, I think, in Kiev. For Russia, it preserved the separatist entities. It gave Moscow leverage inside of Ukraine and froze the conflict without formal annexation to give Russia more time to figure that part of it out. For the separatists, they gained de facto recognition as negotiating actors. As it said, Kiev was willing to give them more autonomy for self-rule and self-governments. It did fail within a few days. The ceasefire was violated, mainly because there was not a clear front line that was established. Both sides were disputing like where the actual skirmish line was and where this buffer zone began and ended. Russia claimed neutrality while they were supporting the separatists, while the West, Ukraine and its partners, claimed that Russia was actually a direct combatant. And this is a very interesting and ironic twist, because we now have that exact, like the opposite dynamic now in Ukraine, where the US won't admit its role in Ukraine. And Russia's like, you clearly are the one backing Ukraine fighting us, right? Okay, so then sequencing dispute. Ukraine wanted security first, border control, and then elections and political concessions. And the separatists wanted autonomy first, then elections, and then establish the new border. So there was, those are like in reverse order from one another. And so then there was heavy fighting that broke out at the airport, as we mentioned before, and some of the surrounding cities. So then this leads to the Minsk memorandum, which was signed on September 19th. So a few weeks later, this was an attempt to clarify buffer zones, to clarify the withdrawal of heavy weapons, to establish some no-fly zones and some monitoring lines for quote unquote independent third parties to monitor the situation. And what that really means is, Five Eyes, Europe, the West, the United States, for them to come in and be able to monitor things. But this also failed to stabilize the situation. But the reason that the first Minsk agreement was important is that it establishes a template that was used later in the Minsk Two agreement, which is in February 2015. It also established a long-running formula of ceasefire, autonomy, elections, and border control. But recognizing in hindsight that the lack of agreement on the order of implementation is what caused it to fail. And so that created a deadlock. And so it didn't end the war, the Minsk agreement, but it paused it for a short time, and kind of transformed the open fighting, like the open conflict, into more of like a frozen proxy kind of fighting, where there's like, surgical skirmishes as opposed to just like open warfare. So it was more of like a temporary armistice instead of like an actual open, like a full-blown peace treaty. So let's see. The historical irony is that both sides later claimed Minsk was useful because Ukraine said it bought time to rearm, and Russia said Ukraine never intended to implement it. And so the mutual distrust that was created out of that helped set conditions for the wider 2022 invasion. So then we can go to back to the timeline. So October 2014, for the last few months of 2014, you have this frozen front, right? They're still fighting, but it's in small little spurts, mostly around the airport, trench warfare, artillery duels, sniper fire. We heard a lot about the snipers in those videos at the beginning. So this goes from an insurgency, like open warfare, like insurgency war, to more of like a semi-conventional war where there's, trench warfare, and closer to like what we saw in World War I almost, where like the line isn't moving, but there's still fire being exchanged and people being killed, but just in a very, very abbreviated spurts. Okay, so now all right, so that then takes us to the Minsk Two agreement. Okay, so Minsk Two, this is on February 12th, 2015, so a few months later. This was the second and more detailed attempt to end the war in Donbass. It was signed February 12th after the failure of the Minsk One and during heavy fighting around Debaltseve. I think I'm saying that right. Officially titled the Package of Measures for the Implementation of the Minsk Agreements, it became the main diplomatic framework for Donbass from 2015 until Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. Why it happened after the Minsk One agreement attack collapsed, the fighting intensified in late 2014 and early 2015. Russian-backed separatists advanced. Ukrainian troops were under pressure at Debaltseve. Europe feared a wider war. And so that led to Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, Petro Poroshenko, and Putin all pushing this deal. And this became the Normandy format diplomatic process. The core structure was an attempt to combine military de-escalation with a political settlement. But this dual structure was also its biggest weakness. Okay, so now we have the 12 main terms, or 13 main terms. Immediate ceasefire, stop fighting beginning February 15th, 2015. Heavy weapons withdrawal. Both sides were to pull artillery and rocket systems back to create buffer zones. That OSCE monitoring, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, monitors, verify ceasefire and withdrawals. Dialogue on local elections, talk on elections in separatist-held areas under Ukrainian law, amnesties to pardon participants involved in the conflict, to do prisoner exchanges for all detainees, humanitarian access to allow aid deliveries and reconstruction support, economic links to be restored, so pensions, banking, social payments. You recall the guy at the beginning who was speaking to the Vice News journalist who said that, all the payments had stopped, like all the guys who were working in the mines and working in like the factories, they weren't getting paid anymore. This is prior to the separatists declaring autonomy from Ukraine. Border control returning to Ukraine, so Ukraine would regain control of its border with Russia after some political steps were taken. The withdrawal of all mercenaries and foreign armed groups, which were mostly on, I think, almost exclusively on the Ukrainian side. Constitutional reform. Ukraine was to decentralize power and grant special status to parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, and to hold elections in the occupied territories under negotiated rules. And then the trilateral contact group was to engage in ongoing negotiations. So the central dispute was security first or politics first. And so this kind of caused this agreement to kind of stall out and ultimately fail. But it lasted, it maintained the peace for the most part for about 7 years. Ukraine's view was that they wanted the real ceasefire first. Then they wanted Russian troops in arms out. Then they wanted their border restored. And then after all those three terms were satisfied, then they would allow elections and potential autonomy for the region. And the separatists didn't trust them. They said, we want our special status granted first. Give us our autonomy, then give us our elections, create constitutional changes. And then after all of that, we will talk about the border, and we'll talk about what is going to be part of Ukraine and what's going to be part of the Russian Federation. And this sequencing was never fully resolved. And what ultimately undermines the agreement is the fighting in Debaltseve. The fighting was very, very intense. The Ukrainian forces were forced to withdraw. And many Ukrainians saw the signing of it by the Ukrainian leadership as done under military coercion. So another element of this agreement was establishing what does special status mean, like defining the terms. So it was intentionally vague and politically explosive. the possible elements that were discussed, the local policing powers, who is in charge of the police force. Russia and the separatists really wanted the Russian language to be protected. We later saw Zelensky crack down on this and eliminate the Russian language from Ukraine, from the parts of Ukraine that he controlled. Local judges and prosecutors, who was influencing them, Ukraine or Russia, and then establishing cross-border economic ties, reintroducing the economic entanglement that was very important post-Soviet Union in the 90s during the aluminum wars, that Putin oversaw during the first 10, 12 years of during his first term, the first 8 years that he was in office, and then some self-government mechanisms for the locals. The Ukrainians were afraid that this was going to create a Russian-controlled veto zone inside the country that would then ultimately undermine Kiev itself. So there was a lot of consternation from Kiev about giving this autonomy to this one little region, because they were worried that if the region was given autonomy, but then was also kept within the constitutional framework of the Ukrainian state, that autonomy would then become a cancer that would cannibalize the rest of the state, right? So Germany and France saw this agreement as the only realistic way to stop escalation without NATO getting involved and creating a wider war. They saw it as diplomacy through containment. The ceasefire never really fully held because there was constant shelling and snipers and artillery that kept going for years, all the way up till the 2022 war. There is very, very ambiguous, vague language about elections and autonomy and the border, and the sequencing of how all that would be unrolled and how it would be enforced. Ukraine had a lot of consternation about Russia's continued denial of direct combat involvement. The domestic policies of Ukraine in granting concessions to Donetsk and Luhansk was deeply unpopular among the hardcore, the fascist elements of the Ukrainian political spectrum, the neo-Nazis, also NATO and the CIA, etc. And there was really no credible penalty system or enforcement mechanism for when violations occurred. So between February 2015 and February 2021, when February 2022, when Russia reinvades, right? Or I guess actually technically invades for the first time. There's a frozen trench war, so kind of like World War I style trench war with regular casualties, frontline shelling, failed diplomacy, and kind of stalled out political process. Just described as managed violence, right? And then in February 2022, Vladimir Putin formally recognizes the DPR and LPR, these two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, as part of the Russian Federation. He claims that Ukraine never implemented their side of the Minsk agreement. They never followed through on their promises. And then a few days later, they invade. So we will get into that we're going to table that for another day. That'll be its own chapter, because that's a whole other can of worms. But bottom line is that the Minsk Two agreement froze the war, but never reconciled the conflict. It was basically just a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire that stalled and put everything in kind of a holding pattern. And while that was happening, of course, there was a lot of subversion and undermining that occurred on the Ukrainian side, because we see the rise of Volodymyr Zelensky, created by Ihor Kolomoisky. And of course, Donald Trump is elected president, and he comes in, and that kind of changes everything. So I think this is kind of the end, I guess the intermission, you'd say, of like the first half of the Ukraine story, because now it kind of goes into hibernation between now, 2015 and 2022, when Russia restarts. Now, of course, there's going to be some important Ukraine anecdotes that come up during Trump's presidency that we're going to talk about. Hunter Biden, Burisma, all of that The Perfect Phone Call with Zelensky. So those are all coming down. But I thought it was important to kind of run the gambit and really sink our teeth into Ukraine and understand the nuance of it, because there's a lot of the problems that we're talking about now and that we talked about during the Biden administration in the political discourse. These are problems that went back to the 2004 Orange Revolution and went back to the 1990s with the Aluminum Wars and went back to the Maidan coup and Ihor Kolomoisky and the Azov Battalion. I mean, all of those things, but also the Kosovo War of 1999 and the Georgian War of 2008. I mean, all of these things that we've covered that were all like different chapters in Putin's story, they all kind of are bricks that build this wall that becomes this larger conflict that now I think also encompasses Iran and the Middle East. So understanding that, I think, was really important. I mean, you could almost call this show the Book of Putin. I mean, with the number of chapters that we've had focusing on Putin. So we will land it there. I'm going to hit the other two ads I need to do. So just bear with me real quick. The first one we will do is soft disclosure.
Get you some of that beard oil.
Now that I'm alone, got the close up. Do you see how awesome my beard looks right now?
I use the beard oil every single day. First thing, comes out feeling all silky smooth. I take the dropper and I manually apply the oil directly to my mustache. Nice and, oh man, I love it. And then I do drops all throughout the hair, and then I just rub it all in. And then I top it off with the tallow stick on the face.
But I feel like I have to grow a beard just to try this beard oil. It sounds
Do it, Jay.
amazing.
It's all from softdisclosure.com, and the best part about it is you'll be supporting Badlands Media, Annie from Willow and Farms, and basically 3 of Annie's neighbors. So that's 5 total American companies that you'd be supporting with one purchase.
I have been using the Soft Disclosure scentless beard oil every day after the shower. It looks unkempt, but it feels silky smooth. I want to look a little wild and unapproachable, but for the woman I trust, she'll be like, oh, it's actually kind of soft. He is approachable after all. Otherwise, stay away. And Soft Disclosure will help you too with that if that's the very specific vibe you're going for.
That is very specific, yes. You guys are supporting American businesses when you do that. It's absolutely incredible, and you get a great product.
All right. And definitely want to hit this last ad because this is a newly produced ad from our friends at Tamarack Garden.
Your body doesn't need more synthetic fixes. It needs real plant medicine. Wild herbs are packed with minerals, adaptogens, and healing compounds your body actually recognizes and can use, supporting energy, immunity, and balance from the inside out. At Tamarack Garden, our supplements bring these overlooked weeds and wildflowers back into your daily routine. Don't just manage symptoms, support your body and eat your weeds. Head to tamarackgarden.com for $10 off your order of $50 or more when you use code BADLANDS at checkout.
Yeah, and can't say enough great things about Tamarack, the folks at Tamarack Gardens. Really enjoyed seeing them in Nashville. They're great people, so please go and support them. Support the people who share our values. And so once again, guys, this is a pre-recorded show. So if you are interested in leaving a rant, or you're listening to this on DVR, like recording, like on replay, you can go to badlandsmedia.tv and click on the boost tab and leave a Badlands boost. And I will read that in next week's episode. So yeah, please hit the thumbs up. Hope y'all enjoyed this and found it productive and helpful. Because from here, I think we're probably going to go back to the Middle East. I do want to bring on Warhamster to talk about Igor Kolomoisky, but I think that that's something that we can do as part of the conversation about Zelensky and the rise of Zelensky, and getting into the Biden administration. So I'll coordinate with him on scheduling. But we will probably go back to the Middle East. And certainly we're going to start talking about like domestic storylines with Trump and his rise in his first term. So excited to where we're going to go from here. That is chapter 50 in the books. It's hard to believe we got 50 episodes under the belt, but hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and we will see you next week on the Book of Trump.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.